Welcome back to Intro to Philosophy 1010. This is our book, The World of Philosophy, an Introductory Reader by Stephen Kahn. In this video, we're going over Plato's dialogue, the Crito. In the previous video, we went over the Apology, or the defense of Socrates, in which he was condemned to death by the majority of the court of Athens for corrupting the youth and believing in gods of his own invention instead of the gods of the state. We'll be going over some of the arguments from the Apology as we go over the Crito. This dialogue takes place in prison when Socrates' old friend from childhood, now Socrates is 70 years old, so his friend Crito shows up before sunrise and sees Socrates there sleeping. And then Socrates wakes up and he says, "Oh, Crito, what are you here? How did you get here so early?" "Oh, it's okay. I did a small favor for the guard," meaning he bribed the guard. And he said, "I'm here to convince you to escape because the ship from Delos is close, and it'll probably be here tomorrow, and therefore that's when they'll execute you." So the story behind the ship from Delos, I'll read from the notes on page 42. The small island of Delos was sacred to the god Apollo. A mission sailed there annually from Athens to commemorate her deliverance by Theseus from servitude to King Minos of Crete. No executions could be carried out in Athens until the sacred ship returned. So Theseus killed the Minotaur, the half-man, half-bull, in the labyrinth. He had Ariadne's thread. He went in and killed the Minotaur, thereby saving the 7 young men and the 7 young women Athens had to send to Minos every 9 years to prevent a war. So they would commemorate that victorious return by sending a ship out to Delos every year. And when the ship was out, you were not allowed to execute anybody. So the ship was coming in. There's also symbolic relevance for Socrates. Is he the Minotaur in the center of the labyrinth, like the Athenian court? The majority of the Athenian court convicted him of being a destroyer of the youth. Or is he like Theseus, who goes into the labyrinth and rescues the Athenian youth, the way Plato describes him? Someone who's saving people from a life that's not worth living. In the Apology, Socrates says, "The unexamined life is not worth living." If you don't question the nature of your soul and justice and these fundamental questions, your life is not worth living. And that's so Socrates said, "Oh, you'd say I can live if I leave Athens and stop questioning everybody about the soul?" No, I wouldn't. That wouldn't be a life worth living, because if you're going to kill me here for doing it, they're going to kill me everywhere else for doing it. I'm not going to live without speaking about the soul and justice, and I believe the God has sent me to Athens to do that. So we went over that, and that is relevant for this dialogue. So Crito says to Socrates, "I didn't wake you up because I saw you sleeping there peacefully." And then Socrates says, "Yeah, I was sleeping peacefully, and I had a dream. And in the dream, a beautiful woman, robed in white, told me, 'Socrates, thou shalt reach fertile Phthia upon the 3rd day.'" So that is an allusion to another Greek myth. This one, I'm going to read, this is from the notes on page 42. In Homer's Iliad, Achilles says, "On the 3rd day I may return to fertile Phthia," meaning that he can get home in 3 days. So Achilles, fighting the Trojan War, King Agamemnon took away his prized young woman that he claimed as his own. You might have seen the movie with Brad Pitt. I forget what it was called, but at any rate, Achilles said, "Oh, then I'm not going to fight. I could get home to Phthia in 3 days with the good wind from here." And he didn't leave. And I'm thinking about how that also relates to the Apology, where Achilles was quoted from, again, Homer's Iliad, saying that to his mother, Thetis, that "I will kill Hector, who killed my friend Patroclus, because that would be honorable," even though his mother told him that the gods say, if you kill Hector, you'll be the next to die in this saga. And he said, well, better that I die nobly, doing what's right, than live humiliatedly. And the strange thing about mentioning that myth here in the beginning of the Crito is that Socrates is saying that I may go home, meaning back to God, back to Hades. But when Achilles mentioned it, he was saying, I'm going to abandon my post. If you don't give me the prize that I want, I'm leaving. So Socrates was absolutely against that. And yet, on the other hand, he was abandoning the post of earth itself, accepting death, it seems, to his friend Crito a little bit too eagerly. So Crito is saying, I think it's unjust for you to die so easily and succumb to this unjust sentencing. For one thing, he says, all the public opinion is going to be against me for not being vigorous enough in your defense. They'll know I could have bribed the guards easily to get you out of here. And if I don't, then what are they going to think about me? And then Socrates says, Crito, what about our previous opinion that we shouldn't be concerned with what most people believe, that we should only be concerned with what the experts in a particular subject believe? And then Crito says, yeah, that's true. And he says, for example, if you were trying to take care of, if you wanted to train yourself physically as an athlete, would you listen to your coach or would you listen to the many people around? If you listen to the popular opinion, you'd take it easy and you or at least you wouldn't have expert advice, so you listen to the person who knows. You don't listen to the public opinion. On page 34, down at the left-hand column, Crito says, yet surely, Socrates, you can see that one must heed popular opinion too. Your present plight shows by itself that the populace can inflict not the least of evils, but just about the worst, if someone has been slandered in their presence. Socrates says, oh, Crito, if only the populace could inflict the worst of evils, then they would also be capable of providing the greatest of goods, and a fine thing that would be, but the fact is that they can do neither. They are unable to give anyone understanding or lack of it, no matter what they do. So for Socrates, the greatest evil isn't death. The greatest evil is a life lived without asking yourself the fundamental questions. And the mob, the masses, the people, the majority who had just convicted Socrates to death, he's saying they can't do anything good or evil if you consider good understanding of self and evil the lack of self-reflection. So then Crito says, well, if you say so, but tell me this, Socrates, can it be that you are worried for me and your other friends in case the blackmailers give us trouble if you escape for having smuggled you out of here? He's saying, don't worry if that's what your concern is, because it's worth the concern. Socrates says, yes, those risks do worry me, Crito, amongst many others. So then Socrates says, all right, you want me to escape. If you can convince me with good arguments, then I'll go with you. Otherwise, I won't. So let's get down to the conversation. And, whereas Crito's like, come now, form a plan, or rather don't even plan, because the time for that is past, and only a single plan remains. Everything needs to be carried out during the coming night. Okay, so then Socrates says, all right, as I said, I'm not worried about what the popular opinion is. I'm only worried about what is just. So if you can show me that it's just, then I will leave. If you can't, then I won't. So on page 37, left-hand column, Socrates says, then in the light of those admissions, we must ask the following question. Is it just or is it not for me to try to get out of here when Athenian authorities are unwilling to release me? Then if it does seem just, let us attempt it, but if it doesn't, let us abandon the idea. And for questions you raise about expenses and reputation and bringing up children, because Crito said, you're going to leave, you have 2 young children and an older child, that's unjust. There's all these reasons Crito gave for Socrates to escape in the coming night. So regarding those reasons, Crito's reputation for not bailing Socrates out, Socrates for abandoning his children and not staying alive to raise them. Socrates says, About those, I suspect those opinions, they are the concerns of those who cheerfully put people to death and would bring them back to life if they could, without any intelligence, namely the populace. So Socrates is not a friend of popular opinion. He says, for us, however, because our principle so demands, there is no other question to ask except the one we just raised: shall we be acting justly, we who were rescued as well as the rescuers themselves, if we pay money and do favors to those who would get me out of here? Crito says, I think that's finely said, Socrates, but do please consider what we should do. Now, he's been pushing and pushing Socrates to hurry up and let's get out of here. So Socrates responds. He says, let's examine that question together, dear friend, and if you have objections to anything I say, please raise them, and I'll listen to you. Otherwise, good fellow, it's time to stop telling me again and again that I should leave here against the will of Athens. So let's reason it out. Crito's saying, there's no time for this. Socrates is saying, slow down, let's reason it out. Now, Socrates doesn't have any intention of changing his mind, and he's probably focusing on helping Crito to understand, at least giving him good arguments that he can then tell the popular opinion about why Socrates refused to accept his money to get out of jail. Crito's worried that everyone's going to think he's a miser. He could have helped his friend stay alive, and he didn't. So in these Platonic dialogues, you have to take the characters into account. What are their opinions? Because Socrates modulates his style of argumentation to the particular characters. Another important point to keep in mind as we read through this, at least according to Leo Strauss, who's a Plato expert, that Crito did not believe in, at least he didn't believe in Socrates' daimon, that voice that he talked about in the Apology that tells him don't do certain things. It never tells him what to do, but it tells him what not to do. So Crito doesn't seem like he believed in that. It doesn't seem like he believed in the dream where the beautiful woman dressed in white told him on the third day, you shall reach fertile Pythia upon the third day, meaning you'll go back home to the spiritual world. So Crito didn't seem convinced by that. Crito doesn't like to talk about the soul either. So Socrates doesn't use the word soul in the Crito because he's talking to somebody who doesn't seem to have much faith in the existence of the soul. Crito's Socrates' friend. He wants to get Socrates out of jail, but that doesn't mean he really believes everything about Socrates' philosophy of the afterlife and the existence of eternal souls in Hades. So that's just something to keep in mind. So then they begin on page 37 at the bottom right-hand corner. They say, well, a little bit above that, is acting unjustly in no way good or honorable, as we frequently agreed in the past, that you should never act unjustly. So Crito says, yes. So one must not act unjustly at all. Absolutely not, Crito says. Then, even if one is unjustly treated, one should not return injustice, as most people believe, given that one should act not unjustly at all. Apparently not, Crito says. Okay, so skipping down, Socrates says, then one shouldn't return injustice or ill treatment to any human being, no matter how one may be treated by that person. And in making those admissions, Crito, watch out that you're not agreeing to anything contrary to your real beliefs. I say that because I realize that the belief is held by few people and always will be. Those who hold it share no common counsel with those who don't, but each group is bound to regard the other with contempt when they observe one another's decisions. So the few and the many. The few are the philosophers, the many are the people who aren't philosophers, the majority of people. And Socrates is saying the few people, the philosophers, don't believe that it's just to exact revenge from somebody, and that there will never be common ground between the few and the many, which leads to a lot of questions. Can society ever be wisely run if there's only a few wise people and they have nothing but contempt for the many, and vice versa? So, but the point here, Socrates is saying, even if someone treats you unjustly, you should not retaliate with injustice. So neither doing nor returning injustice is ever right, nor should one who is ill-treated defend himself by retaliation. Do you agree? Or do you dissent and not share my belief in that premise? If so, we'll go over the whole thing again. But Crito says, no, I do agree with what you're saying. You shouldn't act unjustly even in retaliation for an unjust attack. So Socrates says, then consider what follows. If we leave this place without having persuaded our city, are we or are we not ill-treating certain people? Okay, who are you ill-treating, says Crito. Well, look at it this way. Suppose we were on the point of running away from here, or whatever else one should call it. Then the laws, or the state of Athens, might come and confront us, and they might speak as follows. Okay, so Socrates is now going to personify the laws of Athens. And he's going to have the laws interrogate him as he's sneaking out with Crito. Here's what the laws of Athens say to Socrates, according to Socrates' imagination. Please tell us, Socrates, what do you have in mind? With this action you are attempting, do you intend anything short of destroying us, the laws, and the city as a whole to the best of your ability? Do you not think that a city can still exist, or do you think that a city can still exist without being overturned if the legal judgments rendered within it possess no force, but are nullified or invalidated by individuals? What shall we say, Crito, in answer to that? And then Socrates says, shall we tell them, yes, that is our intention, meaning to get out of jail, because the city was treating us unjustly, but not judging our case correctly. Is that to be our answer, or what? Indeed it is, Socrates, says Crito. Socrates says, and what if the laws say, and was that also part of the agreement between you and us, Socrates, or did you agree to abide by whatever judgments the city rendered? So, then the laws say, I'm going to subject you to the same question and answer process that you've been subjecting everyone else within my borders your whole adult life. So answer me some questions. And then the laws tell them, we set up the laws for marriage. So that's what created the conditions for your birth. So we are responsible for giving you life. We set up the laws for how you must educate your children. So we are responsible for your rearing. So we are like your parents, but we're even more important than your parents because we were their parents too, and all of their ancestors. And so we own you. So on page 39 on the left-hand column, very good. In view of your birth, upbringing, and education, can you deny first that you belong to us as our offspring and slave, as your forebearers also did? And if so, do you imagine that you are on equal terms with us in regard to what is just? A slave. So the laws are telling Socrates, you're our offspring, you're also our slave, and we're not on equal terms. Just because we might say something that you think to be unjust doesn't mean you have an equal right to retaliate against us. And if you do, then you want to destroy us all together and the entire city, because as soon as individuals start picking and choosing which laws they want to obey and which ones they don't, that destroys the civil order. So then he goes over that whole point about not retaliating with injustice, even if someone has unjustly attacked you. So on the right-hand column of page 39, the laws say you must either persuade it or else do whatever it commands, and if it ordains that you must submit to certain treatment, then you must hold your peace and submit to it. Meaning, what the fatherland says. So the laws now are talking, relating it, the laws are identifying themselves with the fatherland. So the laws are the parent and the master of every citizen. So you must, and if we send you to war, now this is an important apparent contradiction. So you must submit, hold your peace and submit, whether that means being beaten or put in bonds, or whether it leads you into a war to be wounded or killed, you must act accordingly, and that is what is just. You must neither give way nor retreat, nor leave your position. Rather, in warfare, in court, and everywhere else, you must do whatever your city or fatherland commands, or else persuade it as to what is truly just. And if it is sinful to use violence against your mother or father, it is far more so to use it against your fatherland. And then the laws will say, furthermore, we give you the option to leave. You can leave. You can take all your belongings and leave at any point. There's no law preventing you from emigrating to one of our colonies or even an entire other country. So then the laws summarize their case against Socrates' attempt to leave on page 40, left-hand column. And thus we claim that anyone who fails to obey is guilty on 3 counts. He disobeys us as his parents. He disobeys those who nurtured him and educated him. And after agreeing to obey us, he neither obeys nor persuades us if we are doing anything amiss, even though we offer him a choice and do not harshly insist that he must do whatever we command. Instead, we give him two options. He must either persuade us or else do as we say. And then, so Socrates, you're not doing any of those. And furthermore, he says, in your trial, didn't you have the opportunity then to request exile as the punishment, which probably would have been granted, but you made a big show of saying, no, I'd rather die than abandon my post. And now, in the secret of the night, you're going to slip away and break the law when you could have done it above board? What legacy will you leave behind? What about all those things you talked about, justice and goodness in general, on page 41 at the top on the right-hand column? Won't they be invalidated by your breaking the law when you didn't have to? And so that is, and then they'll say finally, well, there's a little bit more, but if you, on the right-hand column, 41 at the bottom, as things stand, you will leave this world. They're saying if you don't leave and just accept your punishment that you didn't deserve, but since it's been handed down and you couldn't persuade them not to find you guilty, now you have to just suck it up. As things stand, you will leave this world, if you do, as one who has been treated unjustly, not by us laws, but by human beings. Whereas if you go into exile, thereby shamefully returning injustice for injustice and ill treatment for ill treatment, breaking the agreements and compacts you made with us, and inflicting harm upon the people you should least harm, yourself, your friends, your fatherland, and ourselves, then we shall be angry with you in your lifetime, and our brother laws in Hades will not receive you kindly there. So then Socrates says, Crito, you can try to convince me to leave if you want to still, but the fact is, I am like the Corybantic revelers who think they are still hearing the music of pipes. So the Corybantic revelers would dance in ecstasies and playing pipes, and it would put people in a frenzy and kind of cure them from psychological ailments. And Socrates says, the arguments of the laws are ringing in my mind, so it'll be a waste of your time, but if you think you can do some good, go ahead. Crito says, no, Socrates, I have nothing to say. And then Socrates says, then let it be, Crito, and let us act accordingly, because that is the direction in which God is guiding us. So that's an overview of the basics of the Crito. Now I'm going to read the exam 1 questions that are related to it. Part A, question 1 and 2. So question 1, what is philosophy? What is its value? Why? Explain. Very general. You can draw in all of the readings for this essay, for this exam 1, to answer that question, including Plato's Apology, the Crito, and the Phaedo, which we'll be covering next. Question 2, part A, what lessons do you think you should take away from the life and death of Socrates as it is described by Plato? Why? Explain. So there's a lot of lessons Socrates gives to Crito here. You could bring those into that part A. Question 2, you'd also want to bring in pertinent excerpts from the Apology and the Phaedo. And by the Apology, it's entitled The Defense of Socrates here. All right, so part A, questions 1 and 2. Part B, question 5. Should Socrates have allowed Crito to convince him to leave prison? Why or why not? So, do you think Crito's arguments were better, or do you think the laws as personified by Socrates were better? Crito said, for one, I don't want to look like I'm a cheapskate who let my friend die because I wasn't willing to cough up the bribe money. Number 2, you're going to leave your children behind. You should stay for your children. And those are the two main arguments. He's saying, Socrates, it seems you're too eager to die. And then Socrates says, well, let's look at it. And we just went over all that. So do you think, when I was reading that, I thought the point about you're leaving your children was a really good one. You know, you're going to leave your child without you there as the father to protect your child in this harsh world. And Crito says, you know, their fate is probably going to be the fate of most orphans who have no parents. Of course, they'd still have their mother, but they wouldn't have their father. And nevertheless, Socrates says, no concern for anything other than what is just doesn't make a difference. As if the idea of staying to take care of your child, it wasn't a question of justice. But the special circumstances here is that Socrates in the Apology said that he took it that God had appointed him to the city of Athens to teach the people there to care for their souls and not for the bodily luxuries that they crave in honor and power, and that he would not abandon his post. And we went over that in the video about the Apology. So I think that's a pretty good summary of that, of the Crito.